Hey, what's up guys, Sir Emanon here, and welcome to another video. So this is going to be, everybody's favorite YugiTube content right now, which is going to be the January 2022 Banlist discussion video with a small prediction at the end, kind of throwing in quote marks there just because I'm not super confident in the accuracy of this prediction that I'm going to share with you guys, but just because it's fun to kind of look back and laugh at later on to see how wrong we all are. I thought I'd just put that in at the end, even though I don't normally do predictions. But we have quite a bit to discuss here, and I don't want to spend too much time, so let's go ahead and just get started without any further ado. So the first one, I want to do this all in one take, by the way, is going to be Imperial Order, everybody's favorite. I don't have much to say about this card. It's been pretty much the same card as it has been ever since it got unbanned back in 2017. And people have been asking for it to be banned forever, it seems like. I feel like especially last format into this format. And I think right about now, it's pretty much now or never. If Konami doesn't hit it this list, I don't foresee them ever hitting this card ever. So, I mean, that's just kind of how I feel about the matter. But there's not much else for me to talk about that hasn't been said already. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and move on here. So next is going to be Mystic Mine. I think this operates in a similar vein to Order in the sense that this card has outs to it for sure, but it is very frustrating to play against. To be fair, I think that this card doesn't like lock its own outs as much in terms of things like, Twin Twister, Cosmic Cyclone, like Lightning Storm, just generic back removal. But that being said, it also promotes a lot of like really boring gameplay where people just pass back and forth. But that's a separate discussion as far as what's fun versus what's balanced, and the two are not to be conflated. I think that in terms of Mystic Mine's gameplay, right now it's currently being used mostly either as a flex card for terraforming in decks that natively play field spells. You can think of the Invoked deck, for example, or in decks that just need to buy a couple of turns just to assemble resources to perform an OTK. You can think of things like Tri-Brigade Lyrilusk with the Assemble Nightingale Recital Starling stuff. So with all that being said, I don't think that Mystic Mine is ever really like prevalent in terms of like an actual deck out strategy, just because there's so many outs of this card. But if, in the event that they do ban Order, this card probably needs to be addressed as well, since Order is one of the most reliable outs to Mystic Mine that people can play as just a generic option. So that is something to consider. Will it be hit? I personally am not sure, but we'll kind of talk about sort of the reasoning for my prediction, like the very baseline prediction. Not really a whole lot to go off of, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on in this video. Next up is going to be the beginning of 3 more archetypal floodgates, or just like, I guess, more specific floodgates than things that like any deck can natively use. So this is going to be this card being Artifact Scythe. It's going to be the Arch Nemesis Protos, and then Harpies Featherstorm. So first off, we're going to start with Scythe. This one, I think, is, out of the 3, the most versatile, or the most, I guess, splashable is the better word to describe it, as far as it can be used by multiple different strategies. Essentially, anything that can run Dagda and Verite can just use this card, and it wouldn't be too much of an issue. But in the in kind of like contrast to that, this card also has arguably the most counterplay, because you can do stuff on both your opponent's turn to stop it, as well as your own turn. Things like Call by the Grave, Forbidden Droplet, DD Crow, like Ghost Spell, just hand traps on like Verite or Dagda. Just a lot of ways to like stop this card if you were so incentivized to. But again, is that enough of a justification to keep this card around? Potentially, it really depends, again, on what Konami sees as problematic, because there's arguments for this card and the engines around it, mostly being Dagda, which you can see a fair amount of you guys did, kind of pause it as the more problematic card. Or, of course, DPE, which is kind of the whole reason for why this card kind of spurred in popularity. So it really just depends on which card Konami addresses, if any. And I guess we'll have to determine if that is the case, because obviously Saint Dimension Scythe has been in the game for many years, almost 8 years now, and so that clearly isn't the problem with Scythe. It's just the tutorability of it. And so, do you hit the tutor in the Dagda? Do you hit the kind of enabler for the pop in the DPE package, or do you just hit Scythe itself and call it a day? Really just, again, it's kind of hard to predict these things, because we don't really know what Konami's justification is going to be, because, they don't really tell us. So only time will tell. Next is going to be the Protos. This card, I actually was surprised that this many of you guys were in agreement that this should be banned or will be banned, depending on how you voted. But I can definitely see why. This card, out of the 3 floodgates, is arguably the most highly accessible, while still being exclusive to an archetype. So, you have obviously Chi Shao to search emergence, or just drawing emergence, and then the Heavenly Dragon Circle, which picked up in popularity in the most recent month or so. So this card definitely is very, very strong in terms of its floodgate ability, but unlike the other cards, this card serves other functions, especially going second, just because it is a board wipe for free and it's a big body that's fairly hard to deal with. And I think if you wanted to hit Sword Soul, given how new the deck is, it has only been about 2.5 months after all, this is one of the best ways to do so without actually touching the engine. Otherwise, you just don't hit Sword Soul. I think it's either this or just nothing, of course. So yeah, pretty much that's all I have to say for the Protoss. And then next is going to be the Harpies Featherstorm. This one I think is a more divisive one. A lot of people feel like this card is fine just because it is, out of the three, the least searchable. You only really have like Harpy cards to search it, or like Trap Check. But that said, I think this card also has the least amount of counterplay to it. Like Protoss has less counterplay in the fact that cards like Dark Ruler Droplet or like Chalice on like your own turn, like those kinds of cards don't really affect Protoss in comparison to like Scythe. But then this is even like lower down on the totem pole in terms of just things that can counter it, because you literally are relying on Red Reboot unless you want to play really gimmicky cards like I don't know, Cyframe Epsilon or something, which just doesn't seem very, very realistic just to hit this card. So yeah, this card is like super high impact. It's similar to VFD. It just doesn't really have much counterplay to it. If they draw it, they draw it. You can't really stop them from getting to it since they're just going to hard draw it. And you can't really stop them when they flip it unless, again, you just draw the Red Reboot. So it's very, very difficult to kind of justify this card in terms of its like gameplay. But the reason that you would keep it around is the fact that it is less searchable, I guess, and it is a lot more restrictive into what decks can use it. So I'm on the fence about this one. I think that if you wanted to hit the Tri-Brigade Leerless deck, I think this is the best way to go about it. You could hit the engine. I do think that the deck is still fairly new. I think people are kind of underestimating how new the deck is still. Like, it only came out a couple weeks before Burst of Destiny, so those two decks are fairly recent, and I don't think Konami will hit the deck directly. But if they did, I have some mentions on the screen that I think are potentially hits. I think out of those three, actually, Fractal is the most likely in terms of Fractal going to 1. Because that is also a check on like just the DP Tri-Brigade deck, even though that's not as popular. But if you want to hit like the bird stuff specifically, then like Simorg is a good option just as like a way to stop just like insane follow-up protection and just the Omni negation in Apex Avian. And then you have like Recital Starling if you wanted to change the sort of dynamic of the combos. I think Starling is actually an interesting hit because it will change the sort of flow of how the deck combos, but the deck will still be able to end on very strong combos. You would just pivot into Appaloosa over like the Draco feature, but this also would stop things like or not stop, but it would make things like Recital Starling OTKs a lot more difficult. That being said, you'll see a lot more people use things like Warbler in to bring back Starling from Grave, or Barrel Canary to bring back Starling from Grave, and then attach Wagtail and then get more searches that way. So is this the most effective hit? I'm not entirely sure, but it's something to think about. Next is going to be Veritanaconda. This one's an interesting one as well, just because it's been talked about for a fair amount of time, kind of like Mystic Mine and Imperial Order and stuff like that. This is just the classic Verite versus Dragoon debate evolved into Verite versus DBE debate nowadays, which obviously the latter is much more prevalent. So it's hard to kind of imagine how this engine is going to be hit, just because of Fusion Destiny getting an LT reprint in OTS 18. So does that mean Konami is now more incentivized to hit Verite, or do they just want to not hit the engine altogether? Hard to kind of say. I do think that this probably needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form, just because like the DP engine is like super, super valuable. But I like to think or hear what you guys think in the comments about this one. This one is one that I'm much less sure on. Next is going to be the some of the stuff that maybe can come off the list. So Harp Horror is an interesting one for sure. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I did play Orcus for a while myself. That being said, it hasn't been competitive pretty much ever since the January 2020 ban list when this card got banned. And I think that if this card were to come back to 1, it'd be interesting to see what the deck can do. I don't think that the problem with Orcus is necessarily its ceiling, because you can still do a lot of crazy combos right now with the scrap stuff. It's just a lot of the times the ability is that the problem is the deck building cost if you want to facilitate those combos, as well as just the vulnerability the deck has to just every single disruption out there. So I think that this card is probably fine to go back to 1, as well as the fact that obviously this engine won't be splashable as long as Mermaid remains banned, which it should just remain banned. Next is going to be Thunder Dragon Colossus. This one I threw in there just to see what people would think, and look at how close that vote is. Extremely close, a lot closer than I expected, actually. But yeah, this card is... It's a scary one to talk about, especially if we're all like on the subject of floodgates. That is kind of the like theme and the name of the game with this ban list, is that the first 5 cards I mentioned in this video are all floodgates to some degree. And if you are advocating for the limitation of this card, then you have to kind of like ask yourself what makes this card a more justifiable floodgate than other floodgates as a philosophy, as I have written here. This card is, very, very accessible, kind of in the same way as like Protoss is, because like Chixiao is kind of the equivalent in terms of getting to the floodgate as this card is, just by being in the extra deck as like functionally a like Link 1 type of card. That being said, there are more outs to it than there were previously, but is that a justification for this card? There's also the Nemesis Quarter card that people like to talk about quite a bit, which, I mean, you could play like the Cupid Pitch combos, and the OCG is doing that, but they have a lot more kind of going for it in terms of like O-Line and Just Synchron still being legal over there. But this card in terms of like being a splash, maybe even in like Prank Kid, for example, because they can play Thunder Dragon Fusion and then search Nemesis Quarter, for instance, is maybe a bit of a scary prospect. Personally, I don't think this one should come back, but who knows. Next are going to be just some cards that are either at 2 or could really just go to 3. I think all these can go to 3, no problem. The first 3 are already at 2, and I think Utility 3 makes sense with the Punk archetype coming out. And then the Circle is one that I just think that is fine to go to 3, just because like Salamangreat it hasn't really seen a lot of play in terms of like the top level of competition. And I don't think that this card being limited is what's holding the deck back fundamentally. I think a lot of it is just really the ceiling and the vulnerability it has to specifically Nibiru and stuff. So next I wanted to kind of run through sort of memory lane a little bit and go through the previous ban lists for the past 2 years, just to kind of see what Konami's track record is on hitting floodgates, because again, like I mentioned, the theme with this ban list seems to just be floodgates with, Order, Mystic Mine, Scythe, Protoss, Featherstorm. At least 4 of those cards are like in a very, very heavy discussion right now. So I wanted to look back and see what exactly were the floodgates that were hit in these past 2 years, just to get a read on what Konami's philosophy is when it comes to the ban list itself, just so that we can make a bit more of an educated prediction. So you see the most recent ban list, we saw Barrage banned, and then this limited, a fair amount of like the engine cards. Avita 1 is pretty funny looking back in it. I mean, we all kind of knew that it wasn't really what would hold Drytron back, although I think the meta has evolved sort of past that point. But yeah, no floodgates really banned here. Next is the July 2021 ban list. This one also didn't hit any floodgates. It's kind of cool to look back on this and see, which cards got hit at which point in time. Yeah, this is the list that finally banned LP and Symbol of Heritage going to 3. Next up is the March ban list, and this one did hit some floodgates. It hit the Zexal and the True Chemo Calamities. These were obviously some of the more problematic cards, just because of like, Virtual World being able to make this the VFD super easily, and then you had like the Neuron stuff and like the utopic like Zexal like support coming out. So yeah, these cards were clamored to be banned. Also, you see the Dragonbuster Destruction Sword moving from banned to unlimited thanks to Carrier moving off the list. And speaking of which, we see the December list is the one that banned the Dragonbuster Destruction Sword. So it only remained on the list actually for 1 format. And they actually moved this floodgate off as early as it could have been, just trading with the Union Carrier there. So that's something to think about. But yeah, those are actually, spoiler alert, going to be the only 3 floodgates that we see that were banned throughout this entire 2-year time span. So we have the September list, which was the hit to Adamantipator and more of the Synchron package with the Halka Fibrax stuff. We see the June 2020 list, which XD. We see the April 2020 list, which is pretty big. It hit my Tiger, which I'm still sad about, and I want this card to come back, but that's for another separate discussion video. I really genuinely think it can come back. But, I mean, I know a lot of people would disagree with me on that one. Next up is going to be January 2020. This is the last one in, again, the last 2 years. This list was gigantic. Like, I remember it was huge, but I had to shrink this image a lot, and this list was enormous. But even still, I guess Colossus is a floodgate, so I suppose it's 4, not just 3. Oh, and Azathoth as well. Whoops, I forgot to just circle those two. Okay, so there's Azathoth and there's Colossus here. But the thing that, the point that I wanted to make here, which didn't change actually, was the fact that all the floodgates that were hit were monster floodgates, and they weren't spell or trap floodgates. So, kind of in line with that, I think all of the cards, by the way, being Order, Mystic Mine, Protos, Scythe, and Featherstorm, all 5 of those, with the exception of Protos, which was released in Eternity Code, were legal throughout all 6 of these ban lists. So, I think that, you know, if they weren't a hit in any of those points in time, it's kind of hard to see them being hit now, apart from Protos, which I think is a more recent card and it's a more recent problem, which makes sense. So that's the only one I kind of feel more confident on, but here is the prediction. So I think that these are going to be the changes to the list. Scythe and Verite, again, I'm not as confident on at all. I just think that if they're going to hit, you know, the floodgates, it'll be the monster floodgates over anything. And then if they want to kind of like put a preliminary check on the DPE package, then hitting Verite is like probably the best way to do it. Verite is the one I'm least sure about, followed by Scythe and then Protos. So yeah, that's kind of just my thoughts there. I think that Fractal could easily go to 1 just as a check on birds. Because like I don't really think you can realistically not hit birds if you hit Protos. So yeah, Fractal definitely would change the anatomy of the deck quite a lot. And it would reduce the power level and the consistency of the deck quite substantially. And then following that, we have the Unlimits, which I think, again, all of these can easily go to 3, pretty much no problem. Yeah, there's nothing like, no Order, no Mine. I don't think that they'll be hit, just because, again, Konami does not have a track record with hitting Spell or Trap floodgates. If anything, they move stuff like Soul Drain off the list. So, I mean, they don't really seem to care for that. There's, like, not really any hits. I don't think Featherstorm will be hit. Not because it's a spell trap floodgate, but just because I don't think that that's like the way that they'll approach hitting the Trabeate Loyalist deck. Just because like that card is more of a side card and not a part of like the main strategy. So I think Fractal going to 1 would be like the more like likely hit. But again, that's kind of just what I think here. This is bound to be super wrong. I can't wait to look back and be like, wow, I only got maybe 1 hit or 1 change of these right out of everything here. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Again, take this all with a grain of salt. It's just the opinion of one person, and I don't have any more intel on what Konami is inclined to do than any of you guys at home. So your guess is as good as mine, quite literally. So yeah, again, feel free to discuss in the comments. I'd love to read through those. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you did. Feel free to check out my affiliate links in the description if you want to help support the channel. I would really, really appreciate that. And next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.